Don't hate me. But despite all the comments mentioning that he was the nicest and quietest Beatle, I'm going to break all those stereotypes with 4 facts that show George Harrison as probably the complex Beatle. The number 4 will blow your mind. Number 1. George Harrison constantly complained about his 2 bandmates, John and Paul, mentioning they were not supportive of his career.
I was the one who kept quiet and at the back and let the other egos be at the front.
But considering he was with 2 geniuses, you can't expect the same attention, especially after openly mentioning his main intention in a band was just to play the guitar.
Ambition when I was a kid, other than to play a guitar and get in a rock and roll band.
Furthermore, George never thanked John and Paul in public as the starters of the whole Beatle project, whose compositions were instrumental in the band's success.
They were so busy being John and Paul, they failed to realize who else was around at the time.
Despite this lack of support, the Beatles always included at least 1 or 2 of George Harrison's tracks on early albums. All members and their families followed him on the famous trip to India in 1968, and the whole band stopped performing live, mainly because George was tired of it. I need to be specific. It seems as if all the band members were tired of the whole fame thing, but George Harrison was the one who planted the idea of ending public concerts. If you don't believe me, you can see his resistance to performing at the Abbey Road rooftop concert in the Disney documentary, Get Back.
Well, I don't want to go.
Number 2, was it a lack of support or a lack of confidence? If you watch the Disney documentary, Get Back, you can see how John and Paul were supporting George in the creation of iconic tunes like All Things Must Pass, Isn't It a Pity, and Something.
Something in the way she moves. What attracted me at all?
Just say whatever comes into your head each time. Attracts me like a cauliflower until you get the word.
However, George wasn't decisive to complete the first 2 for the Beatles album, probably because his inspiration wasn't flowing at that moment, not because he didn't have the support from his bandmates. Maybe more songs during their recording sessions from 1962 to 1968 had the same outcome, and George was the one choosing not to move forward and release them at the end. The Get Back documentary was clear evidence of how the 4 Beatles worked together, and no one can say they didn't support each other when creating music. By the way, these 2 tracks, All Things Must Pass and Isn't It a Pity, were not released as Beatles songs, but as George Harrison's tracks on his first solo album, also named All Things Must Pass. Number 3. George Harrison's repeated departures and returns from the band raise questions about his motivations.
I think I'll be leaving the band now.
When?
Now.
Was it a lack of commitment, or was he simply drawn back by the money and fame? He frequently expressed disinterest in recording, touring, and even remaining in the band, as evidenced by his absences during the White Album sessions and the Let It Be recordings.
I don't want to go.
I would like to go on the road.
You would like to?
Though convinced by his bandmates to complete the latter project, his recurring dissatisfaction and complaints paint a picture of a complex individual. If truly unhappy and undervalued, one might wonder why he didn't leave permanently and pursue his solo career earlier. Number 4. George's betrayal of his close friend Ringo. While George Harrison thrived on the perks of fame, including relationships with multiple women, understandable for a young, attractive rock star, his affair with Ringo's wife Maureen crossed a significant line. As George's then-wife Pattie Boyd later detailed, tensions within the Beatles fueled infidelity issues toward the end of the 1960s. By 1973, seemingly lost, George pursued Maureen. A 1973 Montreal Gazette article reported on several incidents, including George publicly professing his love for Maureen in front of Ringo and both women. Adding to the turmoil, Pattie reportedly discovered George and Maureen together. Ultimately, both marriages crumbled by 1975, though Ringo also engaged in affairs and struggled with alcoholism. While marital turmoil was unfortunately common among rock bands in the 70s, George's betrayal of his closest friend remains a dark mark on his personal legacy. Now, I hesitate to get too deep into my possible reason number 5, but I find George's reaction to John's death concerning. His statement, "I went back to sleep. It was maybe the way to get away from it," seems detached and insensitive, especially considering their lengthy shared history and personal bond even after the band's breakup.
But they said, no, that's it, he's dead. So I didn't know. I just went back to sleep, actually. I just, maybe it's just a way of getting away from it. I just went to sleep and then waited to see, what it said the next morning. And he was still dead the next morning.
While Paul faced criticism for his initially stunned and confused reaction,
I was just listening to some stuff, I just didn't want to sit at home. Why? Oh, I didn't feel like it. What time did you hear the news? This morning sometime. Very early? Yeah. Don't know, yeah? Drag, isn't it?
he later expressed his true grief and loss. Similarly, Ringo's shock and expressiveness were readily apparent. George's response, in contrast, raises questions about the depth of his emotional connection to John. Well, this is just my point of view about George, but what's your opinion? Who is your favorite Beatle? Please leave your comments and stay tuned for more content.